Chapter 1, Part 4 of The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution by William Cooper Nell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by the Progressing America Project. The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution. Chapter 1, continued. Massachusetts. James and Hosea Easton, Job Lewis, Quack Matrick, Jack Grove, Bosson Wright. James Easton, of Bridgewater, was one who participated in the erection of the fortifications on Dorchester Heights, under command of Washington, which the next morning so greatly surprised the British soldiers then encamped in Boston. Mr. Easton was a manufacturing blacksmith, and his forge and nail factory, where were also made edge tools and anchors, was extensively known for its superiority of workmanship. Much of the ironwork for the Tremont Theater and Boston Marine Railway was executed under his supervision. Mr. Easton was self-educated. When a young man, stipulating for work, he always provided for chances of evening study. He was always welcome to the business circles of Boston as a man of strict integrity, and the many who resorted to him for advice in complicated matters styled him the Black Lawyer. His sons, Caleb, Joshua, Sylvanus, and Hosea, inherited his mechanical genius and mental ability. The family were victims, however, to the spirit of color phobia then rampant in New England, and were persecuted even to the dragging out of some of the family from the Orthodox Church, in which, on its enlargement, a porch had been erected exclusively for colored people. After this disgraceful occurrence, the Eastons left the church. They afterwards purchased a pew in the Baptist Church at Stoughton Corner, which excited a great deal of indignation. Not succeeding in their attempt to have the bargain canceled, the people tarred the pew. The next Sunday, the family carried seats in the wagon. The pew was then pulled down, but the family sat in the aisle. These indignities were continued until the separation of the family. Hosea Easton published a treatise on the intellectual condition of the colored people, in which was shown the heart of a philanthropist and the head of a philosopher. His work did great execution among those who proclaim the innate inferiority of colored men. Here is a chapter from his experience. Quote, I, as an individual, have had a sufficient opportunity to know something about prejudice and its destructive effects. At an early period of my life, I was extensively engaged in mechanism, associated with a number of other colored men, of master spirits and great minds. The enterprise was followed for about 20 years perseveringly, in direct opposition to public sentiment and the tide of popular prejudice. So intent were the parties in carrying out the principles of intelligent, active freemen, that they sacrificed every thought of comfort and ease to the object. The most rigid economy was adhered to, at home and abroad. A regular school was established for the youth connected with the factory, the rules of morality were supported with surprising assiduity, and ardent spirits found no place in the establishment. After the expenditure of this vast amount of labor and time, together with many thousands of dollars, the enterprise ended in a total failure. By reason of the repeated surges of the tide of prejudice, the establishment, like a ship in a boisterous hurricane at sea, went beneath the waves, richly laden, well manned and well managed, sank to rise no more. It fell, and with it fell the hearts of several of its projectors in despair, and their bodies into their graves. End quote. Quack Matrick, of Stoughton Corner, was a regular Revolutionary soldier, and drew a pension. Job Lewis, of Lancaster, formerly a slave, enlisted for 2 terms of 3 years each, and a third time for the remainder of the war. He died in November 1797. His son, Joel W. Lewis, when a boy, was very persevering in study, and as he depended mainly upon himself, when away from a brief country school term, busied himself for 7 weeks in solving one complicated lesson in arithmetic. Mr. Lewis is now proprietor of an extensive blacksmithing establishment in Boston, where he gives employment to several white and colored mechanics. Prince Richards, of East Bridgewater, was a pensioned Revolutionary soldier. While a slave, he learned to write with a charred stick, thus evincing a burning desire to improve, even against the command of his self-styled owner. Philip Andrews, a colored man, was drowned in Ludlow on the 30th of May, 1842. He was over 80 years of age. He was the servant of a captain of the British Army in the Revolution and, at the age of 16, deserted to the American Army and has remained in this country ever since. Jack Grove, of Portland, while steward of a brig sailing from the West Indies to Portland in 1812, was taken by a French vessel whose commander placed a guard on board. Jack urged his commander to make an effort to retake the vessel, but the captain saw no hope. Says Jack, quote, "Captain McClellan, I can take her, if you will let me go ahead." End quote. The captain checked him, warning him not to lisp such a word. There was danger in it, but Jack, disappointed, though not daunted, rallied the men on his own hook. Captain McClellan and the rest, inspired by his example, finally joined them, and the attempt resulted in victory. They weighed anchor and took the vessel into Portland. The owners of the brig offered Jack 50 hogsheads of molasses for his valor and patriotism, but Jack demanded one half of the brig, which being denied him, he commenced a suit, engaging 2 Boston lawyers on his behalf. I have not been able to learn how the case was decided, if, indeed, a decision has yet been made. Bosson Wright resided in Massachusetts upward of 80 years, and could well remember when the British burned the town of Portland. He assisted in building 2 of the forts, and parted with 2 of his companions on their way to join the American Army. He was a taxpayer for more than 50 years. Bosson said that one Mayberry, a slave from Gorham, saw a British sailor in the act of setting fire to the old parish church, now the first parish in Portland, when he, Mayberry, seized him, and carried him before the leading men, who, being Tories, ordered the sailor's discharge. Being one afternoon on a sailing excursion down Portland Harbor, Bosson directed attention to the fort as not being properly located, indicating the spot which he would have selected. Some years after, when President Monroe visited the Eastern States, the same observation was made by him, and the same spot pointed out as had been by Bosson Wright. One of his acquaintances, a colored soldier at the Battle of Saratoga, walked up quite elated to Cornwallis after his surrender, saying, quote, "You used to be named Cornwallis, but it is Cornwallis no longer. It must now be Cobwallis, for General Washington has shelled off all the corn." End quote. End of chapter 1, part 4.